Hello, my name's Stephen King with InfoVia, and we're here to speak at WWDVC regarding our infoSecur product. I wanted to talk first about the strategic vision for how we utilize our data. I think the first one of these Gartner quotes is pretty much mom and apple pie for an audience like this, that sharing data is a way to optimize higher relevant data, generating more robust data and analytics to help solve business problems. The second one is interesting to me, and the net of it is organizations that share their data externally actually receive 3 times greater economic benefit than those who do not. But what we see with an awful lot of our clients is they're very reticent to share that data outside of their organization because they have no good way to ensure that it will be safe and secure. And that's one of the problems that InfoVia is seeking to solve with our product. This is a little bit more the reality in today's world. And this has actually been validated by clients. It may be a bit of a chuckle since it's a Dilbert cartoon. A buddy of mine actually sent me this a couple of weeks ago, so it was very, very timely. But we hear all the time that people don't trust their data. Now, part of that problem, of course, is maybe on the ingestion. They're not ingesting the data in the optimal manner, and organizations like Clean Data are seeking to help with that. Perhaps their implementation of their databases or data warehouse is not optimal, and that's where we and other consultants can also help. But what we see on the back end is organizations have implemented so many workarounds to try and prevent people from seeing data that they shouldn't, that it's become very, very inefficient, and sometimes they'll be looking at a report and they don't even know all of the data that went into that, and they have little confidence that it was the proper data. And so that's another problem that we seek to alleviate, is eliminating all of that uncertainty and also a lot of the effort that's going in for these workarounds. So our mission as an organization is, and how always has been, helping organizations with their data warehouse implementations to help them gain maximum benefit. We do that through our modern data management strategy and planning and implementation services, data warehouse automation. We are a reseller of both Snowflake and of Warescape, and have an awful lot of expertise to lend in that area. Also mentorship to help train the team so that they can become productive rapidly and also maintain that data warehouse over time. And finally, perspective. Sometimes people have a question about implementation or design or whatnot, and that's where our many, many years of experience and work with many customers can help lend some perspective and help them come up with the best possible solution. A big hole we've seen during the past 3 years in working with organizations has been around data access governance. They don't have a good solution that spans the entire organization and provides the kind of governance that they really want. And we hope that you'll see at the end of this that infoSecur is a good answer to that issue. Here are some of the clients that InfoVia has worked with over the past 3 years. This isn't complete. There are some that we can't show, but it's a good representation of our customers. And what exactly is infoSecur? In a nutshell, it's a centralized tool to be used across all data environments and data sources, and it manages data access governance down to the cell level. Simple. Well, the kind of problems we see our customers struggling with is, number one, they often have chaotic demands for the data. Oftentimes we'll see the case where on a Friday, a VP of sales is told he needs to pull a certain kind of report on Monday, and they don't have that report available. So one of his analysts goes to the BI team, and the person who wrote the BI report that had all the workarounds in it to try and obfuscate some of the data, maybe they're on vacation, and the other BI folks, they don't understand what it is that he did, and so there's no way they can change it until that person returns on vacation. Well, that's not a very good scenario for an organization that wants to be agile and adaptable, so we seek to solve that problem. Number two, constantly changing security regulations. We see this, of course, in HIPAA, in education, with privacy concerns, and one of our customers, US Ecology, this is very important for them. They work with a variety of regulators, and they need to provide them with data, and they need to make sure that it is both safe and secure, but also accurate, that their workarounds they're trying to implement to protect that data don't inadvertently exclude data, that the data is not stale, etc. multiple data sources. We see this one a lot, especially with larger organizations that have acquired many data sources through acquisition over time. And oftentimes those are disparate technology. They have consistent or no management for the data access governance. And we can span all of those databases and provide a solution for that. And finally, enforcement via workarounds. And I'll keep mentioning this one as we go through because this is the most common method that we see. Probably the most extreme example that we've seen is one organization we spoke with in healthcare. Of course, they have HIPAA concerns. They have a full-time person who sits there and they go through all the SQL queries on a daily basis to make sure nobody pulled any data that they shouldn't. And let's say somebody accidentally pulled that data, or they fat-fingered it, or their BI report had it encoded, or whatever. Well, nope. Their enforcement policy is termination. And they have terminated people over these things. Well, that's a really high price to pay for an organization. I think the highest I've heard. You have to both have a full-time person monitoring this, which isn't that why we have computers? It makes me wonder. But number two, that's a high price to pay in terms of personnel. Now you need to go hire people and train them again, and maybe all the other people are wondering, wow, what happens if I fat finger something? Will I get fired too? And so I think this is a more elegant solution in that case. So the kind of typical access governance that we see, here's the vision. We've got over on the right-hand side all these great reports and dashboards, spreadsheets, etc. that we want our BI folks to produce for us. We have above our nice clean data warehouse with elegant rows and columns and joins and everything else. And over here on the left-hand side, we have all of our users with their roles and responsibilities and their authorizations. Well, the nexus of all of this is right here between the data people and the access. And there literally is no tool that spans that for the entire organization. And if it does so in a very simplistic sort of role-based way. It doesn't key off of the data in the database, and it still leads to an awful lot of workaround and error. So here's the typical reality that we see with our clients. As their workaround, they have multiple instances of reports and dashboards and databases that they've pulled internally to try and limit the amount of data that people can see. They have multiple data pulls up here alongside the database, maybe separate databases for external clients or regulators, and those can become stale over time. Maybe they are inaccurately pulled. We see that on a very consistent basis. And then what that leads to is down here with our users in the left-hand side is we have higher risk exposure, oftentimes inconsistent enforcement, low utilization. A lot of times people are reticent to use that data because, again, they wonder about the accuracy. Was it complete? Did I get a stale data set, etc.? And nothing else, it leads to delays. So this is sort of anathema to the vision for what we want for our data warehouse. I'll reiterate this in this list, but I did want to touch on number 3. We had Ken Eckerson come and talk at the Data Valley Enthusiasts a couple of weeks ago, and the theme of his talk was all about how do we optimize our use of these very valuable BI folks. So we've got some intelligent analysts and BI folks that are creating these reports and analyses for us, and really what we want is to be able to use those analyses to make decisions on behalf of our organization. The reality is that very often their hands are a bit tied. They spend an awful lot of their time trying to enforce policy when really that isn't their role, and we're not getting the maximum benefit out of either our data warehouse or these very, very valuable resources that could be helping us make more and better strategic decisions with that data. We heard from one of our clients a couple of weeks ago on a first call. They stated flatly, our executives want to make strategic decisions based on our data, but nobody trusts the accuracy of the results. And they said it was precisely because of that. They've implemented so many workarounds and data pulls and et cetera, that when somebody's looking at a report in the back of their mind, they really wonder, was the data that went into this accurate and current and exactly what I expected? And so they want to alleviate that situation, and I believe infoSecur can help. So what we do is 2 things. We support data access governance, so the ability to share data based on any criteria, role, name, any SQL condition, or the metadata within the database itself. and I'll talk about why that's important with one of our customer studies at the end. Ensure that the proper people have the data they need. So turning it on its head, instead of preventing people from not having data, we want to ensure people have the data they need and they're making sound decisions on that data. And the ability to do this all from a single plane which crosses the entire enterprise. infoSecur can deliver that. Also optimize data access governance. So again, instead of having human intervention or having all of these workarounds by the BI or analysts, we can support on any technology in any environment, on-prem, in the cloud, etc., all of these rules that we've set up within infoSecur. So those are the two big advantages we provide. People can have their cake and eat it too. They can use their data as an asset and at the same time ensure they have data access governance. Let me give a concrete example. So we have here one of our analysts over on the right-hand side, and let's say he's pulling some data from Snowflake. He's supposed to only have access to those records in black up above, and he's not supposed to have access to any of the patient data when he performs a query. Well, we can do a combination of our meta policies with regard to vaccination, prescription, checkup records, and we can use user role to define, say, that he shouldn't have patient information, and we can even pull that from LDAP. And so we push that policy into the optimization layer of any database, Snowflake, any SQL database, and at that point now we have row column level filters. So when that query comes in and looks at that data, all that's going to get returned to that BI person is the data to which they're entitled. And therefore they can use any tool, reports, dashboards, BI tools, ad hoc queries, spreadsheets, whatever, and we ensure they'll only see the data that they're entitled to. Let's drill down on that a little bit more. What this really results in is cell level security. So by column and by row. Again, if we define by meta policies what this analyst has access to, vaccinations, prescriptions, and checkups, we enforce that. And then say no analyst should have access to patient records, and we'll obfuscate that. And what they have returned is what's circled in green there, and nothing more. So that's the kind of power that we bring to the table in terms of helping to enforce our data access policies. A little bit more on data sensitive context. We actually worked with a school district, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on one of the next slides, to analyze all of their data and make some decisions on which data they wanted to base their meta policies. We call them meta policies. And so they considered things like students and locations and profit and loss centers, business units, departments, all of these things, teachers, classes. It came up to be like an 8 by 8 by 8 matrix that they wanted to enforce. Well, to do that by policy or username alone would have been, I'll just say, arduous. For each teacher, they would have had to define all of their students and then all of their classes and all of these other criteria like which school district was taking a look at it, et cetera, and it would have been horrifically complex. But we made that easier, and I'll talk in more detail about that in a second. And that was done again through our meta policies. How do we implement this in something like Snowflake? Well, we do provide that basically firewall or filter, if you will, that makes it so that when people query, they only see what they have the right to see. What infoSecur does is it actually pushes those policies down into the optimization engine, teaches it about these policies, and from then on they're enforced at that level. Oops. And again, that ensures no matter what tools people are using and no matter who is accessing that data, only the data which they need to see will be granted to them. Well, how do we do this in a larger organization? I did say that we can span the entire enterprise. So not only is it important for us to enforce these policies within our data warehouse, but it's equally important to enforce this for all of our data. And so if you have an ERP system, a CRM system, logistics system, and those are based on a SQL database, well, we can enforce those policies across all of those as well. And what that gives you is, with our infoSecur secure views, all users within the organization will only see the results that they're entitled to, no matter what department they're in, no matter what data store they're pulling that data from. And that's I think, kind of a nirvana of what you want to get to as an organization in terms of enforcing these policies. Well, Stephen, this sounds really complex and like it takes a long time. And that statement couldn't be further from the truth. Typical implementation for the first deployment is about 10 to 14 days. And that includes sitting down with a customer, helping them define their requirements, doing a small POC, implementing their phase one, and then deploying that. And all along the way, we're going to be giving them some advice and hand-holding and training so that from then on, they will have the knowledge and the skills to be able to implement more policies and maintain this over time. So again, the implementation is not arduous. It's just a couple of weeks, and then your organization will have the wherewithal to go off and implement these policies across the entire enterprise. Let me talk about what we came here to talk about, and that is some examples of customer success. So US Ecology, we've been working with them for a couple of years now on their data warehouse implementation. It's no secret they've acquired an awful lot of companies over the years, and what that means is they have all these disparate databases and database technologies that they need to try and secure and ultimately move into their data warehouse. Their top priority really was to address some of the needs of the sales organization. The sales organization had been managing everything by spreadsheets in the past, and they had a very low confidence that A, policies were being enforced, but B, that the data was always accurate because they had run into errors in the spreadsheets, in the data polls, etc., as we discussed. And so every time they took a look at a report, in the back of their mind, they're wondering, is this accurate? They also wanted to ensure that they could really just leverage the data and use that for a very positive and strategic decision-making process, and that only their salespeople would see sales, their managers would see their direct reports, and the VPs would see it all. So the happy day that we helped them get to very, very rapidly after they implemented this was they now have single instances of all of these reports, and the access rules determine who sees the appropriate data for them. It's reduced the overhead of maintaining all of these different spreadsheets and reports, but also given them a lot more confidence that they are indeed looking at an analysis that is based on accurate data, not stale data, not workaround data, but the data directly from the data warehouse, which is what they wanted with this project from the beginning. West Ada School District. This one turned out to be a lot more complex than we anticipated. We helped them as well with their data warehouse implementation over the course of the last couple of years, and when it came time to start implementing policy, their policy was going to be based on an awful lot of criteria. I mentioned before it's about an 8 by 8 by 8 matrix of student, teacher, class, faculty, facility, is it the state of Idaho, is it another school district, etc. And they needed really to define their policies based on the metadata inside of the database. So we help them analyze that, implement those policies based on what we call meta policies, and also house those policies in their data warehouse. And so now their data access rules based on the metadata are what return the appropriate data to people. It will also endure over time. So instead of, for say, a given teacher every year having to go in and define which students are in their class, and then for students define which classes they are taking, who are their parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's all very fluid, and those policies remain consistent over time. So they were really, really happy with that result. United Heritage, they came to us at the tail end of their data warehouse implementation, and they knew they had a very big challenge, and that was that their data wasn't secure. And this is an insurance company. One of the side benefits they were hoping to gain by talking to us was a reduction in the reports, but that was first and foremost. So they delayed by a few weeks their data warehouse implementation and rollout, I should say. And at the end of that, they had confidence that their policies were now being enforced. And they've made those a little bit more robust over time as well. But they came back and reported to us that they have now reduced the number of reports that they generate by 20 times. They now have master copies of certain reports, and when they run it, they know that the data that will populate that is the data that people are granted permission to see using their policies. And so they were quite happy with that, and here's a quote from their VP and CTO. So those are just a few examples of how we've helped customers implement their policy and make sure that's enforced and gain those advantages we talked about using infoSecur. I like this quote. Kent Graziano, when he was chief technology evangelist at Snowflake, took a look at our technology about a year ago, and he came back to us and he said, this is the best and simplest data framework security solution I've ever seen. And again, just watch this space for the announcement that we'll be having with Snowflake over the next couple of weeks, but it really will raise the bar in terms of the kind of data policy access enforcement that they're able to provide with their technology as well. So that's all I've got. My name's Stephen King with InfoVia, and I just wanted to note a few things. Number one, our founder, Mike Migowski, will be performing a demo of InfoSecur from the podium later on in this conference, so I hope you can catch that. Number two, we do have a booth, and we'll have somebody in that booth all the time, so if you want to come by and chat with us, ask questions, see a demo, we'd be happy to host you there. And if you're joining us virtually, I've left my contact information here, and I would hope that you reach out to us and say, hey, I'd like to talk about this more. Again, if it's technical questions, how does it work? How do these meta policies work? All of those good things, or as simple as a demo, we'd be happy to support that. So with that, I hope you have a great conference. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you down the road.